Ray, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Yeah, in comparison to Season 1 and 2 of this show, Season 3 really suffers a drop in quality. The art style sacrifices their realism in favour of a more cartoony feel, the story has next to no weight to it, and certain characters have just been obliterated in terms of their personalities. I'll start off by talking about the 4 main plot arcs this season has. Number 1. A group of evil rats have invaded the park and are trying to take it over. Number 2. Weasel and Measley leave White Deer Park and have a family. Number 3. The new White Stag leader Trey is a massive dick and bullies the other animals.
What the hell is going on?
Who's that?
That's
Trey.
He's a dick.
Number 4. Owl leaves White Deer Park to find a mate. I'll start off by talking about plot 4. Honestly, this plotline has to be the least relevant in the whole season. Weasel teases Owl about being alone and old, so she leaves the park to find another owl mate. On part of this journey, she encounters a rook, who is madly in love with her despite, being an entirely different species. It later turns out that this rook has a mate and a child of his own, and his mate just explains that he has a fetish for owls, and she is just completely fine with that. Owl eventually lands on a lone tree, which happens to be the last surviving tree of Farthing Wood. This is actually a nice little callback and gives the eerie feeling to see what was once a thriving woodland in Season 1 is now just a housing estate with one lone tree. There she meets this other owl who I don't actually remember the name of right now, but nor do I really care. He's much younger, is incredibly vain about himself, and constantly remarks on Owl being too old and too tatty of a mate.
Bit tatty, though. What?
Yet he somehow falls in love with her after she gets herself stuck in cement, and the two fly back to the park. This plot is basically just filler. In my opinion, it's stupid, weird in places, and basically tells you it's okay to settle for someone even if they're a jerk to you, because it's better than being alone. Plot number 3. The new White Stag is a massive dick. So at the opening of Season 3, we see our usual White Stag down by the stream having a drink. Unfortunately, poison has been dumped in the water, and this leads to him dying. The new stag which takes his place is a younger and far more bad-tempered stag called Trey, who basically sees all other animals as inferior to the white deer, so you could almost say he's a white deer supremacist. Despite a lot of screen time being dedicated to this plot, it never really goes anywhere. Every scene with Trey involved can basically be summed up like this. I'm Trey and I'm really bad-tempered and I hate all other creatures and I swear I'm gonna stamp on you all. Oh my god, Trey, you're such a dick. Stop being a dick, Trey, stop it. No. I mean, apart from knocking Shadow in the water, he doesn't actually do anything to harm the other animals, he just merely threatens them. Then around episode 8, a storm hits, Trey gets his leg crushed under a tree, the other animals help to free him, and he wanders off. He then comes back 2 episodes later and says that 2 parks have now been merged into one, so there's more space and there's no need for him to be a dick anymore. And that's it, that's his arc. I thought he would at least have a change of heart once the animals saved him, but even then he's still a dick. Instead, it's actually the increased space in the park that gives him the change of heart. Okay? Plot 2. Weasel and Measley leave White Deer Park to start a family. Oh, how wonderful. The 2 characters I found to be the most annoying in Season 2 are getting their very own arc in Season 3. And my god, this arc is by far the worst part of Season 3. Weasel and Measley have 2 children. They travel place to place looking for a nice home to bring them up in, but end up getting kicked out of every spot because the other animals find them incredibly annoying. I do love how the show even acknowledges how much of an abomination these characters are. They eventually meet the dog who befriended Bold in Season 2, who helps them along their journey. I do actually like this dog as a character, but I absolutely hate the slurp they give him every time he speaks.
Oh, it's not rubbish. It's scrumptious food from the farmhouse. You'll find dog food at the bottom, and on top of that is steak and chips. The farmer's dinner.
Eventually, Weasel and Measley decide the White Deer Park is the best place for them, and then decide to head back. And finally, the main plot focus of the season, the park being overrun by a group of rats. Yeah, that's our main narrative for this season. I know I critique season 2 for having a weaker narrative than season 1, but my god, this has got to be one of the laziest plots yet. Last season our villain was Scarface, who although didn't have much personality, did do a really good job of filling the evil and intimidating villainous role. This season we have Bully. He's not a bad character, but he's not powerful or threatening. In fact, most scenes he's either running away or hiding. Nor is he particularly smart or conniving either. He just seems like a massive step down from what we got in the previous season. What's even more stupid about this plot is the whole reason for the rats being able to take over the park in the first place is because the weasels have left. And apparently rats are absolutely terrified of weasels. First up, why are 2 weasels the biggest threat to the rats? Bearing in mind, in the park we also have adders, badgers, a cat, half a dozen foxes, a herd of deer which could trample them, and a kestrel. Speaking of which, where actually is Kestrel this season? As far as I'm aware, she was still alive in season 2, so where is she now? They also had the warden getting involved by shooting them and laying down poison. The animals even begin to launch attacks on the rats every night, where they claim to be able to kill over 100 of them each time, yet for some reason this still isn't good enough and it's the weasels that are needed to end all this madness. Talk about forcing a plot point so hard where you need a reason for the 2 most hated characters to come back to the park. So eventually, as the season approaches the final episode, Owl returns to the park with her mate, Weasel returns with her family, and the animals start to plan out the big attack on the rat population to wipe them out for good. This is where I thought season 3 might actually have a better payoff than season 2. Season 2, I argued, had weak storytelling as a lot of the side plots were purely there for filler and didn't contribute to the overall arc. With season 3, however, there were attempts to link all 4 plot points together. The animals stated they needed Owl back as her wise experience could help think of a tactical plan. The animals needed to get rid of Trey so they could use the help of the rest of the white deer to battle the rats. And of course, they needed Weasel and Measly back in the park as the rats have a huge fear of weasels. So when all these plot arcs started to rejoin, it did feel like there was going to be a bit of a big payoff. But was there? No. First up, Owl makes no contribution to the final battle plan, it's all down to Plucky. Second, despite the now combined efforts of all the animals in the park, they still have little impact on the rats overall. But third, and finally, the way they defeat the rats has to be one of the dumbest and laziest cop-outs of writing ever. Are you ready for it? One of Weasel's children walks up to Bully and bites his tail off. This then causes the other rats to laugh and mock him, so much so that they decide to call off the attack and return to the sewers, despite the fact that they were up in numbers and on the verge of completely taking over the park. What the actual Talk about having one of the most anticlimactic finishes to a war which has been building up the entire season. I just don't know why out of all the possible scenarios they felt this was the best way to give it the payoff. I can only imagine that this was done as the writers had to desperately show us that the weasels were actually useful to the battle, just as everyone said they would be, but because it's painfully clear that a weasel is far less threatening to a rat than any other animal in the battle, they had to pull a random stunt like this. So let's just quickly compare the end plot lines of earlier seasons. Season 1. Animals find the paradise of White Deer Park. Season 2. Fox defeats Scarface in battle. Adder later kills him for good. Season 3. A baby weasel bites a rat's tail off and they all go home. Here's a couple of things the writers could have changed to make this plotline work better. Number 1. It should have been Adder who left the park instead of Weasel. At least by having Adder gone, it would make more sense for the rats to invade as snakes are their primary predators. Plus, Adder would be the only one to have the ability to sneak down the rats' burrows and get the rats as they hide. That would also cover up the plot hole of why the other animals can't kill the rats. It's because they simply can't reach them. Number 2. As part of Trey's character arc, Trey should rather have realised the rats being a bigger enemy of the park rather than the other animals, and sees the importance as to why you need all the other animals in order to maintain balance. So he would set his differences aside and help in the final battle against the rats in rallying up the other white deer. So the overall plot and storytelling is pretty bad, but let's have a look at the other factors. First off, the animation and art style. I don't know why, but this season saw a change in the art style used in previous seasons. The most notable change is the villainous rats. They look more like Disney characters than something from the Animals of Farthing Wood. In my previous reviews, I praised the show's art style for having a realistic appearance and natural animal movements, but in this season that style has been completely thrown out the window for a more goofy cartoon style, where the animals have more exaggerated facial expressions, with more human-like traits added to them. Take this clip of Owl for example. Her wings have now been turned into arms and hands, and she even does human-like stuff, such as styling her hair when she meets another owl. This new style is made more obvious when they start reusing animation from Season 1. Here we see Owl in her Season 1 style, much more realistic proportions and facial features, and then suddenly it will shift into the newly drawn animation for Season 3. It really doesn't match up at all and the transition looks awkward. The colour palette for the animals has also been changed, seemingly swapping out the fainter shades for more bold colours, which just makes the characters pop out more from the watercoloured backgrounds. Let's have a look at some of the new characters introduced. Once again, there's a whole new cast to be introduced too. The two main ones are Plucky, who is Bold's son, and this young hare Dash. These two aren't bad characters, but it does highlight how the show was having two young protagonists to gear more towards a younger audience. You then have Hercule, who's a younger Badger who's basically there to replace old Badger, but lesser so, even to the point where Mossy, follows him around just as he did with old Badger. Again, it raises the question as to why you would kill off older beloved characters if you're just going to have them reskinned into the form of new characters. Ada finds herself a mate called Sinuous, and to be honest this is one of the more stronger parts of the season. It gives Ada a chance to flesh out her character, and seeing her reaction to the death of Sinuous later in the series was actually quite touching. The final character that comes to mind is Spike, who was originally sent to spy on the other animals, but eventually befriends them, especially Toad, and decides to fight alongside them against the other rats. Spike was actually enjoyable, especially when he feels guilt after letting Toad get attacked by Bully and the other rats. And it was actually a nice surprise to see an outsider animal get introduced to the Oath and actually fully convert from evil to good. Now let's look at some of the older characters. First up, Fox. For some reason in this season, they decided to make him incredibly old, to the point where his voice sounds like he's about to keel over at any point.
Once upon a time, I was the fastest fox of them all. Now, out of all the foxes in White Deer Park, I'm the slowest.
All he does this season is mope around and sleep, and constantly reminds us of how old he is. This would be okay, because I guess time has passed since Season 2, but he's the only animal who seems to have aged. Everyone else appears to be much the same. Vixen still seems young, and hell, even Toad, who came across as quite old in the previous season, seems to have more life and energy than Fox. I actually thought they were building this up to him dying at the end of the season, but no, he doesn't. He's just old, weak, and slow. But the prize for the worst character by far this season has to go to Weasel. Yeah, that's right, it's not actually Measly that gives me an issue this season, it is Weasel. I don't know what the writers were trying to go for, but they absolutely destroyed her character. They made her incredibly cruel, self-absorbed, and borderline abusive. Everything that goes wrong for them, she will immediately blame Measly, even though it's painfully obvious it wasn't his fault. She'll constantly call him names, encourage the kids to hate on him, and just look at this scene here.
Wait, Fido, Cleo, your father's eaten nothing but voles since we settled in this lovely place. Let him have first go.
Can I really? Ooh.
And the worst part is that Measly never actually stands up for himself. In fact, he still falls head over heels for Weasel despite the constant abuse. I honestly thought they were building to something where Measly would eventually stand his ground, take the kids back to White Deer Park, and Weasel would need to learn a lesson about her selfishness and nasty attitude. But it doesn't. She never gets called out for this abuse. In fact, when her and Measley do eventually return to the White Deer Park, she gets a hero's welcome. I mean, credit to the Season 3 writers, they actually managed to make me feel sorry for a character that I hated in Season 2. So, yay? So, in conclusion, unlike the first 2 seasons, I would not recommend watching Season 3. Whereas the first 2 had a mature and realistic approach to the struggle of animal life, which doesn't usually get depicted on television, Season 3 feels like they're trying to gear more to a younger audience and therefore sacrifice some of this dark realistic tone in favour of more cartoony comic relief moments. And not that there's anything wrong with that in itself, but this is the Animals of Farthing Wood, not a Disney cartoon. Then there were also the issues of how Weasel treats Measley throughout the season, which, contrary to what I just said, is probably one of the darkest undertones the series has, as it shows a character who is unknowingly in an abusive relationship. Maybe I'm looking too far into it, but that is the impression I got. My final verdict for this series as a whole would be to definitely watch Season 1, watch Season 2 if you're interested in seeing how the characters develop, and then don't bother with Season 3, as whatever you enjoyed about the series in the previous 2 seasons, it's mostly lost in this season. Thank you guys for watching my review of the Animals of Farthing Wood series. Please leave a like and a comment in the section below and let me know how you felt about the series, especially in comparison to Seasons 1 and 2. Also let me know what other shows you want me to review in the future. But until the next one, take care.